Welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. This week, we're talking about building teams. Why do we sometimes need to recalibrate or revitalise teams? What's needed to create great dynamics? And what happens when leaders don't take the time to do the building? So come and join us for being a dynamic team builder.
Hi Bobby, we're talking about teams this week, right?
We are indeed.
So, what have you got to say about teams?
Well, where shall I start? So when I was looking at this, I've run lots of teams. I've been in teams. I was trying to think about all of my experiences with that because I flipping love being in a team and, sports teams, work teams, family teams, whatever it might be. And I do like running teams as well. But was thinking about like the good, the bad and the ugly from that. And there were a few things that jumped out at me in terms of how teams I have been in or run have been. And they haven't all been perfect. And I want to come on to that. But I think the things that come out to me loudest and clearest were really knowing each other and taking the time to really know each other, and it being a safe space where, you're all right to actually be going into the team and saying, I'm having a bad day, and everyone's fine with that. And that there are times of a little bit of discourse or a bit of a rub when people are disagreeing with each other, but not necessarily in a way that everyone's going to then go off and start bitching about it, because we've got opposing ideas that we're in the flow of trying to work out what's the best thing to do. We want to shape this around things rather than it just being our own experience. But, those were the things that struck me most. And then the things from the other side of things, and this is quite early doors after I left the army, but I remember not being on a senior leadership team, but being managed by somebody who was, and knowing that what happened was that they were potentially agreeing all together in a room to do something, and yet coming out and talking very differently about items on their agenda afterwards. And I remember thinking really early doors to that, how the hell can a team like that be running an organisation? And yet it wasn't the first time I saw it, and it wasn't the last. And what that can actually do within organisations as well. And I think this is the first bit for me that it'd be good for us to get into was, so what does happen when it doesn't gel? And from a leader perspective, how do you spot that and what do you do about it? And so here we are again, good old Harvard Business Review, but I came across an article which talked about 20 questions to ask when your team's vibe is off and what you should do. And so, of course, it says reflect on what you think feels off. And the interesting thing is that often what comes up when you've got teams behaving in this way, or where the vibe is off, and I definitely have experience with this as well, but people will go immediately to thinking that it's trust issues and it manifests like that, when in fact what's going on is that there's discrepancies in goals, priorities, or expectations. So rather than getting straight in there with the behaviours that aren't working, or I don't trust you, or whatever that might be, that the best thing to do is to go back for a discussion on realignment. So, you're looking at resetting goals, looking at the results that you've got so far. You might need to reset strategies and tactics. You might need to reset roles. But all of that is non-triggering as such, because you're not pointing the finger at you're the person that's causing the problems or anything like that. And I thought that's really powerful to go that route first, to see if you can get consensus and get everybody back in on the same line of sight. I think it's so important. But then, of course, you can't disregard if revitalization does need to deal with elephants in the room, unhealthy habits or anything like that. And it may well be there. She talks in this article about resetting your communications habits, resetting your meetings, and resetting the dynamics in whatever way that you actually need to. And I think that's also important. And current experience is saying to me, after COVID, people are meeting unhealthy. I read somewhere that on average, people are in meetings for 22 hours a week now. It's double the amount that it was.
Hell.
Yeah.
Kill me now.
I know, it was double the amount from before COVID.
Really?
And so I think anyone listening to this, I want you to go and take a look at your diary right now, because I think that is happening for all of us in some way, shape or form, for many, many people. And actually getting back into a room and going, what are we doing all of these meetings for? And is it the right sort of meeting? You know, there's times that I've seen where people will be having a whole debate over Teams chat and then meeting for 2 hours to share information. It's completely the wrong way round.
Yeah, and I think it goes into your point, doesn't it, Bobby, about the senior management team having a meeting, agreeing something, and then coming out and either having a different objective, and how that does cause this offness. You know, there's a misalignment in terms of messaging coming out of senior leadership. And this idea of communication, I think, is super important. I do wonder whether the increase in meetings is because we're not working so much face to face, and so there's less of the, you know, the chats or the sort of other things that go on. I do think that might be a symptom of a lot of the working from home, that everyone seemed to think that having meetings was the solution to lack of connection, which obviously isn't working. And so they need to find another solution to that. I'm going to sort of rein it a little bit back just into some theory. So some of the things that you've been talking about in terms of how teams work and how conflict, or where there is a misalignment, how that's dealt with. So when we were planning the themes for this, when you talked about teams, you made the reference to Tuckman's model, which is forming, norming, storming, performing, adjourning. And yeah, I know that Tuckman's model is not perfect, but it does give us sort of a very broad idea of how we go from that initial bringing people together, where everyone's kind of excited and curious about each other and sort of needing some direction, to then the storming element, where people start to push against each other, different ways of working, start to grate, there's conflict. And that's always a time where leaders really need to come to the fore to help address the offness. And then obviously you sort of resolve some of those things, get into performing, and then maybe the team breaks up or the people start to leave for pastures new, and how we deal with that sort of mourning element of losing people that you've got used to working as a team. And obviously with Tuckman's model, it doesn't just go in that linear way. We've already talked that, but I don't know that anything's linear. Maybe light traveling is linear. That's about it. But there are other elements that come into, it's not as simple as this is what happens when we have a team. We form, we norm, we storm, we perform, and then we keep going, or we adjourn. So there's a theory by Johnson & Johnson called cooperative learning, and they talk about what's needed in terms of, so, you know, Tuckman's model is sort of like kind of a bit robotic for my liking. It's nice for a simple way of describing things, but I don't know that it gets into the messiness of it. And so there are a number of other models that try and deal with some of the messiness, and cooperative learning is one of them. And this idea that the team needs to understand that they're not just a group of individuals, that they are independent, but that everyone needs to contribute. And we've talked maybe about this idea of everyone needs to be heard, and particularly when things are off, in my experience, that often the offness is a result of too many loud voices being heard. Maybe we've talked about too many meetings, but the way meetings are managed so that actually you don't get the diversity of the thought, and you don't get this feeling that everyone feels that they're required and that their contribution is valued. Promotive face-to-face interaction. So, and that might be slightly controversial now. Obviously, this was developed in 2008, but there are lots of people arguing that this connection, this actually interacting with each other, is really important, and how you behave towards each other, how you speak to each other, the language you use, the sort of rules about how you are going to interact are are directly influential on how you perform. Individual accountability. So yeah, we are independent, but we all are also responsible for doing the work that we're responsible for. Social skills, so interpersonal skills, some of those things that you've talked about, how we are with each other, asking for help, acknowledging mistakes, owning things, and then having a time for group processing. So again, going back to some of the things from your article, this idea about being able to reflect, but without blame. So identifying what things work, what things aren't working so well, and agreeing how things will be moving forward. So yeah, that's a little bit of theory for you just for the moment. I'll have a chat later about other elements of Tuckman's model that aren't sufficient.
I think both of those really resonate, because I think whilst thank you so much for bringing the theory, because it wasn't the way that I went with the research with this. But what kept coming back to me is calibration or recalibration. And the fact is that I think for whatever reason, and your point about things not being linear, is that, and this, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but you should never settle. You've always got to be alive to something might needing to be calibrated. Wherever you are in Tuckman's model or in the, remind me again, I keep thinking talc, Johnson & Johnson.
I know, it is. I mean, it is Johnson right. & Johnson, so yeah.
Cooperative, what was it? Cooperative learning. So I think that with both of those, they are both pointing to this continuing to look, to hone on a dynamic.
Yeah.
And I was thinking when you were talking about those, if I think about the Tuckman model, things that struck me, leaders having to lead. But again, I think we've talked about this before. That point of storming is so important. But that is the time where I have experienced, chiefs, leaders going into one-to-one mode rather than bringing people back together because it's too uncomfortable. So it's very difficult to then get beyond that storming stage, hence why I've probably also then witnessed this disparate nature of being in the room and all going, yep, and then coming out and doing something completely different because it's not dealt with. The discomfort hasn't been gone through. I think it is uncomfy, but that level of discourse and that level of storming is sometimes the juiciest part of getting to a dynamic team. Yeah, I'd say that for one. And then the other thing that you were pointing to with making sure that all voices are heard, my experience has been that sometimes leaders choose people too often in their own guise.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that you don't get that range of discourse. And I sat on a team, there's all the sort of different psychometric tests, but not naming any of them. There's like where somebody's a red. And
oh yes, that comes from the surrounded by idiot.
The insights. So a red leader chooses all red. Now the interesting thing is that when I have done that sort of form of psychometric test in the past, when I was younger, I was pretty red. But as I've got older and I've done my coaching development, etc., I became yellow, or much more yellow.
Oh, that's interesting.
It really was. However, the red never disappears. So when I was stuck into a dynamic team of all red and them all shouting all over it, oh boy, did they find out how friggin' red I could actually go. But, I don't say that because, oh, clever me and how red can I go? It was terrible. I mean, it wasn't a shaped team because there wasn't that variety in the team. And so that was just another point, the dynamic comes from difference. I firmly believe that. And then the other one point that I wanted to give, we've done a gift recently around the power of collaboration. And I mentioned Richard Watkins and about communicating and different meetings. And you were talking before about we've lost some of the different forms of communication because everyone's working from home. It's meeting heavy. I still maintain, and he talks about this as well, there are different types of meetings. You can create a huddle virtually. You can create a brainstorming session virtually. You can create a routine meeting virtually or doing something different. But it's almost articulating what the hell you're doing together. Is it information sharing? Are you being innovative? But the problem is that this bland, we're having a meeting without anyone really establishing what the hell you're doing there. affects the dynamism of teams as well, I believe. So I think I was just aligning some of the things that I've been thinking to the two models that you've just been talking about, which I think are both very key.
Yeah, and actually, just to sort of make it slightly less academic-y, there's a set of really funny videos by a group called Nutshell Brainery, and I'll share them in the links. And each of the videos refers to Tuckman's stages, but using the Avengers. So they take elements of the Avengers and show how the Avengers, as they were formed, follow Tuckman's model. So it's really clever and quite funny, and slightly less dull than some of the other sort of ways of talking about Tuckman's model. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But just to sort of finish maybe some of that discussion on Tuckman's, I completely agree that, you know, in a way, often leaders earn their money at that storming stage. But I do think that in terms of organizational leadership, I think that the forming stage is often overlooked. And I've got a real issue, and at some point maybe we'll do a LinkedIn Live or another episode on it. But this issue of onboarding and how the whole onboarding process to actually, first of all, bring new people into a team, because that's a whole other element of if you're entering a team where everyone else is already at maybe that sort of a more mature element of the stages, i.e. that, you know, they're already performing, but to bring someone else in new, they then have to go through a whole forming, norming and storming element. And I do think that this issue of onboarding, properly making people feel included, both them feel included and the team to feel that they are included, is really often overlooked, and is just sort of, yeah, here you go, here's the procedures, and yeah, okay, off you go, good luck. And I don't think that onboarding is given enough attention in terms of how you can integrate people and include them into teams when they are new.
I completely agree. And I'd also written down, when are the points in time that you need to recalibrate in your team dynamics? And we've talked about when things go wrong. I'd also put when things get too comfy as well. Mm-hmm. But my top one was every time a new person arrives into that team, because the team are back to reforming. They've adjourned. And this is where I think that the adjourning bit is lost, because in certain respects, you have adjourned a team when someone leaves. It's not the same team. Yeah. It never will be again. So you're back to the beginning. And I'm absolutely with you that needs to take time. I am a believer in good profiling tools to create shared language about how we work together and how people work with each other, and taking the time to look at all of that and to share that, you know, in terms of what it means when I'm being quiet versus what I'm being like when I'm talking, you know, how I want to be working within the team. That is so important, because it gets past so much to get moving faster.
Yeah, because, I mean, you've created a little culture, right? And so you're a new person coming into, and you don't know what the rules of that culture are. As you say, to recognize the signs of where someone is engrossed and doesn't want to be disturbed, or that some people like to bounce ideas off things, you know, just to be able to understand how that culture, microculture even, manages itself and what their unwritten, unspoken rules are. We've talked about trust and the sort of that building of trust, or that creating of that space where it's, I'm not going to say safe, but where you can still be courageous, but it is caring, and you understand and respect other people's differences and different ways of working, and celebrate them in a way, you know, rather than saying, oh, well, this person gets quite grumpy on a Monday morning until they've had their coffee. It's like, this person is amazing after their coffee, but in the morning they need, you know, they need time to process. And that's a wonderful thing, because processing, reflecting is important. So yeah, I do think it's an overlooked space.
It's a really interesting one as well, isn't it? But I'm sitting here thinking about the balance between being the new person and the people who are already there. Because okay, there's a number of different trains of thought. I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but you've got a team going, right, here's the new person. We need to explain to them how things get done around here. So that person then feels like they've got to shoehorn themselves in to how it gets done. And I know from my own experience and sort of like type of personality that I have into a new team, and will have been told after one or two of the first meetings, we don't tend to ask as many questions as you do. And I've had to sit there and think, okay, right, so what do I do now? Do I stop asking the questions because the meeting's going on longer than expected? Because basically what they're saying to me is that I'm talking too much, which, you know, is a strength of mine. But I'm a bit like, but no, I'm asking questions. One, for learning. I don't think that I'm probably asking questions, which is usually the case, that other people aren't. So next time I went into the meeting, I said, look, I've been told that I'm asking too many questions, but I don't want to apologise for that because I need to learn to be any good in this team. Yeah. Some people look rather uncomfortable because I'd not named them, but called them out on it. At which point the chief exec turned around and said, I'm delighted for your questions and I'd like other people to take your lead.
Nice one. Yeah. I absolutely take your point, Bobby. It is a two-way thing.
But I felt both the sensation of wondering if I needed to conform, or two, did I head into what could have been the storm because I wasn't behaving the same as everybody else. And so I just throw that in there because I think that that's the same for anybody who's coming into that. And it just plays to the point of how important the onboarding is.
And you're right. The element I didn't talk about was it's also the time to find out how the new person works and how they approach things, and to be able to understand that this is not going to be just a recreation of the team because Ethel left and now you're the new Ethel. And once you are onboarded, everything's going to go back to exactly the same way that the team worked when Ethel was here, rather than going, hey, let's celebrate the achievements and wonderfulness that we had with Ethel. She's gone now. Now we've got a new opportunity for changes and for things to maybe go in a different direction. We've got some new fresh blood. That sounds all a bit weird. But yeah, now we've got the opportunity to have a different contribution that will create ultimately a different team. And we have to accept that. And that kind of brings you into Belbin's 9 team roles, because again, another thing that really Tuckman's model doesn't address is that we're not all little automatons all doing exactly the same thing in the team. And I think you've alluded to this. I think we've talked about this before, where we were saying we needed people who are finishers. And that's one of the roles. So Belbin identified 9, and that's the resource investigators. So that's sort of the person who is going to be exploring opportunities, developing contacts, sort of networking, the team worker, the person who listens, the person who's diplomatic, the person who sort of calms some of the things down, the coordinator, the plant. I like that because that's not a green plant. Every office needs a plant, but this is a different type of plant. They're the free thinker. They're the ones who generate ideas, solve difficult problems. The monitor evaluator, the sort of more strategic, the more discerning, the person maybe who sometimes says this isn't going to work. I confess that that's the person normally who winds me up because I'm a bit of a plant in the nicest possible way. The specialist, the shaper, the implementer, and then the completer finisher, another person who often really grates with me because they have skills that I don't have. So really, Belbin sort of identified those generally as the people that we need, or we need one of each, or if people do multiple roles in a team. And so sometimes we need to accept that we are missing some of those elements in a team. And I think that some of this self-reflection, some of this off vibe, that time to sort of look and go, what is off? And maybe it is because there's too many resource investigators, too many plants, but not enough monitors, evaluators, not enough completer finishers, not enough implementers, all the ideas, but nobody actually doing anything.
I agree. I think the other thing that concerns me with a Belbin, there's all sorts of other things out there, and this can affect teams as well, is, and we've done this ourselves, so this is a slight confessional as well, when we say, oh, we're not a completer finisher, we're a plant. or we're a something. And so what happens, we're back to fixed and growth again, but people become fixed. And so they'll say, well, I'm just a plant, full stop. And as a leader of a team, absolutely, you have to look at what people's preferences are, you know, the things that come most naturally to them, be it a plant or be it a completer finisher. But the dynamic of the team is based on, a lot of the time, people being willing to go, it's not my default place, but I can learn to be this.
Yeah.
For the sake of the team. So I love a bell bin or anything else besides, but it's when people sort of go, I'm just one thing. And that concerns me, because they've got to be that one thing when it's needed, but they've got to be able to fill in the gaps for the sake of the team as well.
Well, you spoke in another episode about I am this and I am that. And I think that and is really powerful, isn't it? That when I've been doing my creativity innovation training, that we're told not to go no or but. We're supposed to go yes and. And. So we're supposed to build on things, this idea, as you say, of that sort of growth mindset. And I completely agree that when we have these, we can have a tendency to go, oh, well, this is me, and that's it. You know, here you go. This is me. I'm unapologetically a plant. And I think there are, as you say, there are two elements. One is being aware of it, but also being aware of what the weaknesses of that tendency are, or that default are, to know that that means that those are things that you need to be aware of and to mitigate for, in a way. And whether that is to know that you have someone else in the team who you could turn to and say, I struggle with this, I would appreciate some help, or that you say, I struggle with this, I appreciate some coaching, some mentoring on this element, so that I can be a plant and a finisher, or I at least know how to be a finisher when I need to be.
Absolutely. When I've trained with Belbin in the past, I often get people to, you know, from the questionnaires and what have you, to rank all 9. And I pose to them that they could play the part of the first 4 on their list, if required, in a team. Not 1, but 4 parts. 5, 6, 7 may well be places for development or for support. 8 and 9 might be complete blind spots to them. And so in which case it's then part of the other members of the team to recognise for them the blind spots that they've got. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Have you come across De Bono's thinking hats?
Yes, I literally just was about to say something about that as well. I like the thinking hats as well.
The way you were talking about it also makes me think of this exercise that we've been doing about thinking hats, and you'll try and approach an issue by putting on either it helps. It's a way of helping discussions as well, that you can each take a hat, and that might be your preferred hat, or you might be challenged and take on a hat that you don't normally wear. And the hats are so that the white hat is focusing on facts, the yellow hat is the optimist, the black hat is the devil's advocate, the blue hat is the manager, the green hat is the idea generator, and the red hat is the emotional thinker. And it just enables different conversations, but it also, as you say, is that challenge of, okay, maybe you say, I'm the optimist, the yellow hat wearer, but today I'm going to be a black hat wearer. I'm going to be the devil's advocate, just to challenge and to practice. You know, we're not going to get it right straight away, but to practice thinking with a slightly different approach or a different mindset that might be uncomfortable, might not be your norm or your default, but actually is a great way of getting people to be slightly more flexible if they feel stuck into their Belbin role.
And the other thing that I love about the hats, that age-old saying about standing in another person's shoes, I think it gives you the opportunity to do that. And the other thing that I think it does is that it helps you observe others better. Because if you've got to take on a hat that isn't your norm or your preferred, how you learn is by watching somebody who normally wears that hat. So it helps you begin to observe and assess people in the team more rather than just being fixed on what you're bringing. So we're back to active listening again. Active listening and active observation, assessment of the others in the team, knowing that there will be practices where you might need to step into their shoes while they step into yours, just to get an alternative view. And it's great, safe ways to help through the storming stage as well. So it's constructive storming. There'll still be abrasion, but what you're doing is that you're taking some level of edge of it by enabling people to go, well, rather than just being asked off with the green hat wearer the whole time, put the fucking hat on and have a go at it yourself.
Yeah.
So I love all of that because it stirs the pot, but it's for the greater norming and performing later. So I love all of that, hence why I'm a constructive disruptor. I don't know what hat that has me wearing, probably black, but...
It's quite playful as well. Well, I've heard of organisations where they literally do have the hats. So you actually do wear the hats. So that also makes it easier to identify and to be clear, like, this is the point of view that I'm taking for the purpose of this discussion. Also, as you say, in terms of storming, it reduces that personalisation because, you know, there is a little bit of, okay, this is not about Bridget having a disagreement with Bobby. This is about the green hat expressing an approach or looking at, this is the green hat lens talking to the black hat lens. And so I do think there's also an element of depersonalizing this, you know, how some conflicts can get a little bit personal.
And the other thing, I think it helps teams learn to challenge because, of course, what tends to happen with the hat wearing, that, you know, the normal black hatter has a green hat on and then carries on behaving like a black hatter. But that allows the rest of the team to say, you're still wearing your black hat.
Yeah.
So they learn to challenge each other. Again,
and it's still playful, though.
This is where play can be so helpful to get us through some of the stickiest stuff that we have to contend with. You know, there doesn't need to be massive fallings out about anything. You know, we've talked before about if you call a conversation difficult, it's going to be difficult, potentially. Whereas this is taking all of that out of that so that you get to something and everyone's feeling a similar level of discomfort, but in a way that's copable with because you're doing it together.
Do you have any other sort of approaches other than the hats or sort of challenging people to expand their capacity or the number of roles that they can take on?
The other one that I use that I'm accredited in is Facet 5. And Facet 5, which is different to what we've been talking about, because the ones that we're talking about are what we refer to as type-based. Facet 5 is trait-based. So there you're actually using a psychometric tool that's talking about your level of will and determination, your level of affection. And I mean that in terms of, you know, are you a loner or do you prefer to work in an altruistic way to great many of the team? You know, how energetic are you? And then what's your level of control? So all of us then get a score between 1 and 10 on that basis. So the first thing is that you have your own profile about what you're like against those 4 parameters. The other one that they throw in is emotionality. So how different do your scores get when you're under pressure, which is a great one.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It is and I love that. I mean, it's why it's it is my favorite tool, because where do you go to when you're under pressure? And so that you can then have those discussions. The way it all blends out is that you actually have a coaching conversation in the first instance about your results. And then the cool thing is that you can then create a teamscape. So you can put your whole team together in one so that you can see where everyone's will score is versus their control score or whatever it might be. And the way that the training goes with that is we call it line dancing. And so you get the people up moving around saying, right, go and stand on the line against your score for energy. And so everyone gets onto the line. And, just an anecdotal story, a boss that I worked with, I was at sort of like an 8 or a 9 when he was at a 1, and he's rolling his eyes going, that is why you are so exhausting in my world, which was sort of funny, but I could understand that. So that I knew that for him, I couldn't be bounding around like Tigger the whole time because I'd probably get thrown out of a window. So that you begin to acknowledge where other people are. And again, it's playful, but you can have the conversation. And the facilitator is sort of like saying, okay, Bobby, so how do you think that X feels about your energy score, or how do you think they feel about your control score? Because that's where we were completely different. He was at a 10 and I was at a 1. I was just like, oh dear. Well, I'm not really that uncontrollable, but maybe a bit. But again, you can be in the conversation, you can have the facilitator with it. And the thing that I think that gets the crunch though, with whatever thing that you're using, you mentioned earlier about language to be used when you're in conversations and what have you. None of these things are a one-hit wonder. It's like anything, you've got to keep them alive. If that's the thing that you've decided to invest in as an organization, keep it alive. Keep it alive in your ways of working. When you're looking at recalibrating, get your profiles back out and go, what's off? What is it that's not, especially for a control person, if we're going back to realignment of goals or what have you, is it that the uncontrolled person has gone off on a creative, woo-woo land and it's taking away from what the team are meant to be doing? You just don't know. But these things can be kept coming back to be used as your point of references.
Nice one.
And it's shared,
like
and it's shared language. But I love that one as well. I think it's really good. And the point I was going to make with this Forbes article I had, which is 6 ways successful teams are built to last, one of the things it says in there is about clearly define roles and responsibilities, but it ain't talking about your job description. If we hide behind job descriptions, we're back to our conversation about we're more than a title. We are definitely more than a job description. And so all of those things that we've talked about, be it Belbin, be it the hats, be it Facet 5, allows you to begin to understand the interconnectedness of each other, how you're dependent on one another. If I can't be a plant, who do I go to? All of those sort of like conversations. So you become a system.
Yeah.
And that's why I say keep going back to it, because that's the team that gets built to last. And as you've rightly pointed out, and then recalibrate when a new person arrives, because they will come with a whole load of different distinctions as to who they are.
Love it. Right. Well, we're approaching the end of our chat. So anything else you want to add in? Any other gems that you had picked up?
I don't think so. And do you know what? I have failed. I haven't got a quote.
Okay. In that case, my turn then. And it's not a quote. So yeah, slightly random. I just was really taken by the idea of, we talk about leadership a lot, but we don't talk about followership and how important, the followership plays in leadership, but also in teams. And so I came across a really cute little video. So I'm afraid it's a video, not a quote, of the Dancing Man. I don't know if you've seen it. And it's an example of followership. So there's a lone guy crazily dancing at a festival on a hill somewhere. And,
I have seen that. I love it.
and he's obviously the leader. He's obviously the thought leader. However, nothing happens until he gets the first follower. And it is a he, so I'm using he, not just referring to all leaders as he, but until he gets his first follower. And it's once there is another person there, other people start to go, I want to be in with the crowd. And so you suddenly see sort of 2 or 3, and it's the follower who gets other people in. So it's the follower who's encouraging people to come and join, while the leader is just like off on whatever drugs they are on, dancing. And then, 2 or 3 more people come, and then suddenly they're not crazy people dancing on a hill. Suddenly everyone wants a piece of it, and everyone's rushing then to get in on the action, to be part of that cool gang, the cool team. So it might be slightly random for what we were talking about today, but I love that video. I hadn't seen it before. And I think it's a really, really good example of, the leader is not the only person, is not the most important person, then it is other parts of the team that play a really, really important role as well.
I cannot agree more. I think that, that there's a holding of shape together. It isn't necessarily always the leader, but it's the greatness of all of the parts in the system. So well done for bringing that.
Well, that's a quote. That's a quote, Bobby. The greatness of the parts of all of the system.
Oh, well, there you go. A quote today from me.
Okay, well, I'll speak to you next week. Bye.
Take care. Bye. Thanks for listening. Links to any references we have made are provided on our website and on the Spotify podcast page. Next week, we will be in conversation about belonging, inclusion, dealing with all manner of micro behaviours. So join us then for Being Included.